Good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Epstein, president of the Lincoln Group of the District of Columbia. Welcome to our September meeting and program. Tonight we have a kind of a special program. We're hosting our two Lincoln Group Fellows at Howard University, two PhD candidates who we fund with scholarships and help them in their research endeavors. I should add that one of the fellowships is named for Edna Greene Medford, our member and a professor emerita of history at Howard. She's joining us tonight. So each of our two students will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will throw the floor open for questions, comments, reactions, and discussion. Let me introduce them both briefly about their topics. They will introduce themselves, their bios, when they start speaking. Ebonee Davis Hayes is a PhD candidate who is working on the memorialization of African American cemeteries in Alexandria, which at one time was a center of the slave trading business. Fahtim'a Yaro is working on a provocative topic about the distasteful slave trade in people who were called fancy women. I will leave that to her to explain what that means. So with that, Ebonee, the floor is yours. If you unmute yourself and share the screen, we're ready to go.
Hi, I'm Ebonee Davis Hayes. Happy to be here this evening. A little bit about me. I think this is my fifth year in the doctoral program at Howard. I'm an African diaspora history student, and I am writing my dissertation on the memory of slavery in Alexandria. And I am this is my second time attending Howard. I went to Howard for undergrad as well and was a history major. And then I went to Morgan State University and majored and got a master's in museum studies and historical preservation. So my background is museums and archives. I've worked for the National Park Service and other local and state and entities, all within the museum and public history world. And currently I work at Virginia Theological Seminary. I'm the director of the reparations program here. And we have our hands full as we are the first and what we think maybe only institution that is paying direct cash payments to descendants of individuals, Black people who labored at the institution between 1823 and 1951. So that is my day job, and my night job is this dissertation that I am 3 chapters drafts complete and 2 more to go. So accepting all prayers. So I will begin. As I mentioned, the working title of my dissertation is Memory of Slavery: How Black Communities Shaped the Memorialization of Slavery in Alexandria, Virginia from 1983 to 2023. This dissertation examines the memory of slavery and emancipation in postbellum Alexandria, Virginia, as interpreted at 3 historic sites, with a specific focus on the early 21st century memorialization of these sites. I argue that impacted by the international waves of memorialization of slavery in Europe, Africa, and the Americas, Black community groups shifted the public memory of slavery and emancipation in Alexandria and influenced the city's present-day reparative efforts. From personal or individual to collective, public, and then official, the arc of memory in Alexandria was bent by the actions and efforts of its Black citizens, motivated by the preservation of heritage sites associated with specific elements of their identities. My dissertation highlights the ways in which the city's history as 1, a major port city for the domestic slave trade, and 2, incestuous loco of urban slavery, and 3, a union-held contraband stronghold, informed the collective memory of Black Alexandrians, a memory that ultimately became the foundation for their identity in the years following emancipation. In this dissertation, I explore the memory of slavery and emancipation and its changes over time as transmitted from the collective to the public, and eventually as it is enshrined into official initiatives such as monuments, memorials, and museums. For decades, the public memory of slavery in Alexandria was rooted in the city's role in the Civil War. Many institutions of that time that are still in operation today focus their efforts on telling the story of their occupation by Union Army forces during the war. However, this was in contradiction to the collective and in some cases public memory of the city's Black residents and institutions. According to the scholarship, this contradiction of memories is not an uncommon occurrence when examining the memory of slavery across the diaspora. Over the years in former slave societies like Brazil and Virginia and Jamaica, scholars have documented the differences in the collective memory of slavery across descendant groups of both the enslaved and the enslavers. They've also explored the ways in which public memory of slavery informs present-day tourism practices in places like Ghana and Liverpool, and how the production of memory teeters the line between symbolic recognition and political maneuvering. In each of these locales, countless others across the diaspora, the memory of slavery is explored as a vehicle of heritage preservation and identity formation. Similarly, I aim to showcase the memory of slavery and emancipation in Alexandria as transmitted from the collective to the public and then enshrined into the official. It has been not only a source of healing, but a reinforcement of identity and a point of activation for the city's Black communities. So the study will utilize, my dissertation utilizes the methodological framework of social history, employing a bottom-up approach to examine the transmission of memory of slavery and emancipation in Alexandria. Primary sources used are newspapers, very heavily the Alexandria Gazette. It is like my gold mine where so much is documented. I use a number of diary and journal entries, correspondence, photographs, census records, slave schedules, meeting minutes and notes, inventory ledgers, oral history recordings and transcripts, as well as community event paraphernalia, school yearbooks, local media footage, and museum archival resources. Archival and exhibit materials housed at Alexandria museums and historic sites will be examined to showcase the official memory of the city. Such materials will include brochures, archival collections, audio-visual materials, wayfinding, signage, and display text. I also use city communications, media, and marketing materials to mine and gauge the evolution of memory during the postbellum era. Several repositories were used, but so far, as I mentioned, Alexandria Gazette has been the greatest gold mine. The archives of the Episcopal Church and local Catholic churches also have proven to be fruitful. And then the bulk of my research has come from the Alexandria Library System's local history and special collections, the Alexandria Black History Museum archives, as well as the archives of my job here, Virginia Theological Seminary, Episcopal High School, which is next door, and the Office of Historic Alexandria's records. These repositories hold collections that are directly related to local Black history in Alexandria and the city's founding from then to present day. Okay, I'm sorry, forgive me. I'm going to change my slide because there we go. So I have 5 chapters, each focus on a museum that is featured throughout. The first chapter is Alexandria during slavery and emancipation, which lays the groundwork for the history of slavery and the international and domestic slave trades from Alexandria's founding through the Civil War. By exploring the city's specific role as an international seaport, hub of the domestic slave trade, and Union stronghold, the birth, development, influence, and maintenance of Alexandria's Black communities are highlighted. Overall, this chapter argues that Alexandria's foundation as a slave society was influenced by the international currents in West Africa, England, and the Caribbean. This chapter's goal is to showcase the strategic position Alexandria held as a port city and acknowledge the foundational moments of memory and identity formation within the historical narrative of Black Alexandria. Chapter 2 is the Freedom House Museum. Prior to 1808, when the transatlantic slave trade was the main mode of fueling. Yes. Oh, okay. Prior to 1808, when the transatlantic slave trade was the main mode of fueling the American slave economy, Alexandria had a small domestic slave trade industry that mostly moved enslaved people via overland coffles. However, this all changed when, in the Chesapeake region specifically, almost at the same exact time that the transatlantic slave trade was outlawed, the land was being depleted for overuse with the tobacco farms. And in response, the industry of slave trading increased significantly as men from every class across the city went into business as independent traders and or established partnerships firms like that of the Franklin and Armfield Slave Trading Pen, which is in Alexandria. And between the years of 1828 and 1861, the building in which the Franklin and Armfield business operated, 1315 Duke Street, housed several slave trading businesses that collectively trafficked thousands of enslaved men, women, and children from Alexandria to cities in Mississippi and Louisiana. The building at 1315 Duke Street is now a museum known as the Freedom House. Its existence and interpretive plans that feature not just Alexandria's history of slavery and the domestic slave trade, but the local history of African Americans, I argue, is a direct result of the city's continued collaborative partnerships with Alexandria's Black residents, stakeholders, and social organizations who've leveraged their collective memory of slavery to inform the public historical interpretation of the site. This museum is currently under renovation, but it is open to the public during the renovation, and it has just a terrible history of slave trading, and the men who owned and operated their businesses out of this building are known far and wide for their treacherous ways in the slave trading business. But over time, the Black community of Alexandria took ownership of the story of that building, and through community groups like the Society for the Preservation of Black Heritage, they started to give their own city community-led tours to tell the story of what happened to their ancestors at that site, which then influenced the city to get involved. The National Urban League eventually occupied it and created what we now call the Freedom House Museum. And then when they fell into financial troubles, the city of Alexandria took it over, and that's the renovation that is happening today. So it is, in this chapter, I really draw a through line of how these individual community activists and their work, when they were just giving tours outside on the steps and the building was boarded up, to keep that story and the memory of those ancestors alive, has now influenced this museum that is undergoing a multi-million-dollar renovation to be open to the city today. Chapter 3 is the Contraband and Freeman Cemetery Memorial. At the onset of the Civil War, Alexandria, Virginia, a Union stronghold, immediately became a refuge city for enslaved people seeking to escape bondage. Alexandria's new population of freedmen quickly grew in numbers, forming a tight-knit community as they gained employment, purchased land, expanded family and kinship ties, and even exercised their civil rights. While building community, they faced devastating rates of death and disease due to substandard living conditions and racist and neglectful government oversight. With no adequate public cemetery for the freedmen and women in place, as a response to the surmounting death rates, the Union Army in 1864 was forced to establish a contraband burial ground. Now known as the Contraband and Freedmen Cemetery Memorial Park, the burial ground became the final resting place of roughly 1,711 Black Alexandrians. Through examining contraband life and community in Alexandria during the Civil War, this chapter chronicles the Contraband and Freeman Cemetery Memorial Park from its 19th century creation to its 20th century commemoration. What I aim to highlight via an investigation of extensive archaeological records, newspaper archives, and ethnographic research is the self-determinative force of Alexandria's contraband and freedmen population, a force that I argue pushed forth the spirit of memory from the 20th century Black Alexandrians harnessed to bring forth the memorialization of their ancestors' burial ground. This cemetery is open to the public year round. In the picture, you see the front of it. It's along Washington Street in Alexandria. Um, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it has a sculpture, and then throughout the burials are marked. And the majority of the burials at this site are children. And so the graves are marked. There's small markers for the children and larger markers for adults when you walk through. And then the bricks along this front park walkway, there are white bricks marking where the graves extend beyond the boundaries of the fence that are there. This memorialization effort was like a labor of love started by two women in Alexandria, Lily and Louise, who heard randomly about the cemetery when the Woodrow Wilson Bridge was being redone. And they were about to tear down a gas station, which the cemetery was underneath. And there was a Washington Post article that lit them on fire. And now we have this museum about 20 years later. So it is their efforts establishing a friend group, doing the research, taking to the city, galvanizing the public that really brought forth this museum in the memory of their ancestors. And this other picture here is from one of the archaeological digs, and you can see the outline of the various graves, and you can see the ones that are smaller versus the larger size ones. So this is chapter 4, the fort and seminary, I have just began working on this chapter. And in this chapter, I plan to discuss Alexandria's contraband and freedmen population, both before, during, and immediately following the end of the Civil War. It aimed to showcase the foundations of what became known as two of Alexandria's most prominent Black communities, the fort and seminary, and the ways in which they immediately began to memorialize their ancestors. Fort Ward was a Union Army military fortification built in Alexandria during the Civil War as part of the Civil War defenses of Washington, or what became known as the Civil War defenses of Washington. After the war, the fort was abandoned, and large amounts of freemen who'd escaped to Alexandria settled in the space and established a post-war Black neighborhood fondly known as the Fort. They also set up shop in what is lovingly called the seminary, but it was the grounds of my current job, and the Episcopal High School next door, because all of the individuals who lived here worked here as freedmen or their ancestors did. And so this was a safe space that was abandoned during the war that they could create community. For nearly a century, newly emancipated Black people worked and established a strong community in the fort and surrounding seminary neighborhoods, producing generations of influential African Americans. However, beginning in the 1950s, the city of Alexandria systematically uprooted the Black residents from the fort to develop land into a historic recreational outdoor space, the Fort Ward Park and Museum. Within a decade, at the height of the civil rights movement, the entire community had been displaced. The fort's buildings were demolished, institutions closed, and graves disturbed by the city as part of their efforts to open the park in time for the 100-year anniversary of the Civil War. For decades, the park only told the story of the fort's military occupation, highlighting the Union's actions during the Civil War. But through the efforts of Black communities groups made up of former fort residents and their descendants, a new interpretive plan was developed in 2015. And as I am just beginning with the research, what I am learning is that in addition to their community, they established churches just outside of their community that hold a lot of records, Oakland Baptist Church being one of them, and Mead Memorial Church being another, that have oral histories recorded of former fort residents talking about what it was like to be displaced in that way. And they are actively fighting with the city to make sure that this interpretive plan is not just developed, but is actually implemented. And so you can go to the fort today and see that there are changes in the interpretation, but it is like an ongoing thing to fight because there are still burial grounds on the property that are not being properly protected. So I'm gonna figure out how to tie a pretty knot on this chapter, but it is happening right now that I kind of don't I want to wait to see what happens, but I also want to graduate. So this is chapter 4, the fort and seminary, and this is the last chapter where I focus on the museum. This was to be the end of my dissertation, and then I had a meeting with my advisor over the summer and had a bright idea to add a chapter on memory, which is my last chapter. Oh, is my slide gone? Okay, it's not there, but I can just stop sharing. Um, my last chapter is titled "And So We Remember." Which will pull together all of the through lines that I talk about in each chapter of all the memorialization efforts and the ways that the Black residents have taken the memory of their ancestors and made it into public and official memory across the city through these different sites of heritage and memory. And it will highlight those efforts and hopefully bring it all together to showcase and drive home my argument that the way Alexandria looks today, where you can go and see a Black History Heritage Trail all through Old Town, and all of these things that are now telling this story of the Black residents of this city, it is only happening because of the efforts of the Black residents who descend from freedmen and women who came here looking to escape bondage, and also found community with the city's already free Black population, and they galvanized and carried on and stayed in that memory to present to the city and fight that story is told.
Well,
Thank
thank you, soon to be Dr. Ebonee Davis
you.
Hayes. It must a lot of hard work, and I know it's frustrating that you keep having to go and dig up more stuff. You should have not have come up with a new idea for another chapter. But
I thought she would say no and say stay focused, but she supported it, and so here we are.
okay. Well, thank you very much. And now we turn to our second presenter, Fahtim'a Yaro. Fahtim'a, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fahtim'a Yaro. I'm a fifth year PhD student or candidate at Howard University this year in the history department. I got my bachelor's in history and my master's in African diasporic history. And yeah, I'll get a little bit into my research like during the presentation. So the overview of today's presentation, I'll talk about the fancy trade, the location, research trip that I did, newspapers, which is a big resource that I use, updates for my presentation, and the bibliography. I'm sorry, maybe I should have read the presentation to you. My presentation today is called The Presence of the Fancy Girl in Records. Sorry, my computer. In records and print. Okay. So, women and enslaved women and girls subjected to the fancy trade were commonly referred to as fancies, fancy girls, and fancy maids. They were they were also sold into the trade if they were deemed desirable. It was heavily influenced by Anglo-Saxon beauty standards as well. So they often had lighter skin and looser hair texture, and many of them were the product of rape by enslavers, which contributed to the phenotypes that they typically had. And they were often sold young with the hopes that they would become more desirable as they got older and worth more money. So during sales, they would be distinguished because they were typically dressed differently than other enslaved people who were being sold. Their clothes typically had like more expensive and like hardy fabrics, and they were also sometimes adorned in jewelry like necklaces, earrings, things like that, which set them apart, and they were heavily objectified. The Mississippi River played a pivotal role in the fancy trade because it was a major transportation route in the antebellum period for goods and people. Enslaved women were often transported by boat along the river from the upper South to the aforementioned cities in the Slide, and they were sold to those who were seeking enslaved concubines and prostitutes. So for my research trip, I originally intended to travel to an archive in New Orleans. However, due to several public health emergencies, I pivoted and went to an archive in Virginia instead. I went to the Library of Virginia, and I looked at the Silas Omohundro collection. Silas was a Virginia slave trader and owner, and he owned a slave jail and boarding house. Um, because fancy girls and the fancy trade tend to be more obscure in the records, I wanted to use this presentation as an opportunity to point out their presence and sources that don't necessarily center them. First, taking a look at personal records highlighting Karina and her children to get a glimpse of their lives, as they often don't have like records that they created due to like illiteracy and it being illegal, things like that. Um, Second part of the presentation takes a look at broader records like newspapers um, to see other enslaved women's experiences, other fancy girls' experiences, as well as public discourse and anti-slavery sentiment that discuss their experiences specifically. So the experiences of enslaved fancy girls tended to vary. We can see through the records, we can see Silas's fondness for Karina by what the records in his account books say. Many times we can see that money is given to Karina to get dresses for herself, like elaborate dresses, and then also money for her to get jewelry to adorn herself with. And he also paid for her to get her likeness done, which was very uncommon for enslaved people to have portraits of themselves, and him being the one that paid for it also spoke volumes. And in his will, although a bit hard to read on the right, he praises her for being a good woman to him and mother to their children, whom he acknowledges in the account books and in the will as well, which was not that typical during the time period. And he also leaves property and money to them after his death, and um, they are freed upon his death as well. Um, Also, I wanted to point out that Karina became Silas's enslaved concubine when she was around 13 years old and began having his children shortly after. So none of this is meant to put Silas in a positive light or to make it seem like Karina never suffered or, just kind of glamorize her enslavement, just kind of like speaking to what the records, what they show. Um, Nevertheless, there are several entries that show that their children were treated better than many enslaved children whose fathers owned them. There are several records where Silas gives money for the children to get books, and on different occasions, they were given opportunities to travel, and they were also given money for an excursion I saw one time to see a hot air balloon, which is, again, it kind of deviates from the norm for what we typically see with enslaved people and their children. I know it's a little hard to read with the script, but I wanted to include it anyway. So the first article, you can't really see it because it's very long, so I'll just discuss it. The title is Slavery in its Mildest Form, and the writer is sharing the experience of an enslaved woman, named Lizzie, and she suffers greatly because she deals with the constant threat of her children that she was made to have with her enslaver, Mr. L, being sold away and saying that her daughter is pretty and could take her place and be sold for a high price. Again, feeding into the fancy trade. Oftentimes their children were, you know, casualties of the trade as well. And he also said that their son could be sold if she didn't comply with his wishes. Um, in addition to this, she's forced to work for small wages on a boat, in large part because of her mistress's jealousy, and she pays her master $30 a month, and her children are underfed in her absence. Mr. L says that Mrs. L says that Lizzie shouldn't complain because she's perceived like a lady, and that this is slavery in its mildest form. The writer intends to mock this by shedding light on the impossible situation. So here you can see sometimes fancy girls, they didn't always have the same situation as Karina. Sometimes they were really in between a rock and a hard place. Here, Lizzie deals with um, sexual violence from her enslaver. Her children are constantly at risk of being sold away, and her daughter facing at the threat of facing the same situation that she has. And she also deals with troubles from the mistress who has jealousy and resentment towards her. For the second article, you can read it a bit better. And the writer discusses that papers in New Orleans are condemning Hiram's Powers statue, the Greek slave, which I included at the right, um, so you can see it, uh, saying that the statue is indecent because she lacks clothes. However, Dr. Dewey, who is the writer, offers pushback, stating that the marble enslaved woman who is adorned by chains is also displaying modesty and sadness by her condition, and that she's forced to have her body exposed. And in the end, he compares this to the fancy girls who are often sold in New Orleans. So in this way, fancy girls become from more obscurity to a part of public discourse. And at the bottom, I've included a small clip from an auction that shows the results. And here you can see that a fancy girl was sold for $8,050. And today that would be equivalent to $16,846 or around that price. And prices for fancy girls typically started around like $1,000. They were on the high end for as far as like slave sale prices went. And you could often see men spending this amount of money if they were really wealthy or if they wanted to flex their wealth to others, in addition to the other reasons for getting a fancy girl, which was sexual violence and concubinage. The first clip is a slave sale ad for a fancy girl, and her name isn't given, but she is described and her skills are given. Her dehumanization is further shown when the enslaver offers to let her be taken for a grace period, in return if they aren't satisfied. And readers learn that she tried to run away, which is why she's being sold in the first place. The second clipping is a response to the first. And there were several articles that did a response to this first clipping. And so this is a critique that comes at the beginning, and it calls out to women, mothers, daughters, and sisters to read the terrible situation that slavery has caused fellow women and that they should revoke their support of the institution, which commodifies and exploits the virtue and the beauty of your sex. So it includes the ad at the bottom, which I didn't include because, it's at the left, but that one is critical of the institution and it calls for women to have solidarity with enslaved Black women. The last article is a critique of slave traders and the pro-slavery community for allowing the class fancy girls to exist, stating that it's cruel and indecent in nature and calling for shame. It includes clips of slave request ads, especially one specifically requesting fancy girls. And it also informs the anti-slavery Whigs party of one of the people posting the ads being supported by a Whig member of Congress, Reverend Johnson Esquire, and it calls for the Whig member to speak up about the company that he keeps in the conflicts and morals. So I also came across several articles that were critical of pro-slavery Christians. And the first, Henry C. Wright highlights and calls out the hypocrisy of the church and those associated with the church for sitting by while watching people um, sell men for their labor and women as fancy girls, the same way they sell animals and considering them members of the church without batting an eye, and them refraining from selling on the Lord's Day doesn't make them moral or good Christians, nor does partaking in Christian rituals. Kind of hinting at this lack of accountability and people using Christianity as a means to like excuse them for the acts that they're committing and what they're complicit in the present. Um, I'm sorry. Okay. So for the next ad that I included, for some reason the clip is not loading. But it's similar to the first clip in that there is a letter written here and it recounts an auction of a 19-year-old enslaved fancy girl and how the bids got higher the more her qualities were read, and how it was the mention of her Christianity that really drove up the price. And the writer is kind of taken aback by the irony of the situation, where people who are saying that they uphold certain values are okay with condemning someone to an inhumane situation while sharing the same religion and seeing it as a plus. Her name isn't added in the record, but she was sold for $2,000, and today that would be the equivalent or around the equivalent of $4,089. Okay, so I recently changed the focal point of what I want my dissertation to revolve around. Um, Staying the same, I'm still going to be focusing on enslaved women. However, I am zooming out of the fancy trade, and we'll be focusing on enslaved mothers instead. And I included a picture from a display at the Franklin and Armfield Museum, also known as the Freedom House Museum, that kind of bridge the gap for me a little bit. So it touches on the horrors of the fancy trade, but also highlights the struggle of enslaved mothers. So moving forward, I aim to focus on fugitive mothers, and it's just where my curiosity led me. And there's room to add in the scholarship, in addition to just having more access to sources, because as I mentioned earlier, things on the fancy trade, like the sources on the fancy trade tend to be like more obscure. So yeah. And here's my bibliography. And yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Very good. Excellent presentations, both of you.
Thank you.
Uh, we will now move on to our questions and comment portion of the program. Uh, I'd like to begin. Emily, that one clip you had of the sale, I believe it said it was in February 1865, where a man bought a fancy girl for $8,000. So that tells me that these slave traders were kept going right up till the end of the war. They didn't realize that the end was coming, or they refused to believe it, right? That was a stupid purchase.
No, yeah, for some of the articles, I was very surprised at how far into that year people were making such large purchases, especially like when it came to buying enslaved people. Like it seems as though like they just didn't believe that the end was here. Like, yeah, so I thought that was interesting as well.
So the slave trade, uh, there was a recent book by a professor from the University of Mississippi about the slave trading during the war. Continued right up to the end of the war. These people believed that somehow the South was going to turn the tide and slavery would somehow continue. Is that evident in your research?
From what I saw, it did appear that way. Confidence, I guess. Confidence, and because like slavery was like so embedded into society, it seems as though like they just didn't think that, society would exist without it or that they would succeed and still be able to keep their enslaved people. But yeah.
Right. Janet Saros has her hand up. Janet, take it away.
Hi, this question's for soon to be Dr. Yaro. Uh, it'll happen. Kid, did you come across a particular time when the term fancy girl was starting to be used? Was it mostly in advertisements? Because I think you could make a case for Sally Hemings being Thomas Jefferson's fancy girl in terms of what was expected of her and how he did, take care of their children. So it seemed, but I don't think it was a term in the 18th century. But I was wondering if you had any knowledge of that.
So I'm not sure exactly when the term started, but I know that it was derived from like English, like when people say I fancy you, like kind of like
Mhm.
that, like it kind of like strives from that. And I have seen some people allege that Sally Hemings like may have been a fancy girl, but I'm not sure if like if it's solidified. Like I'm not sure if somebody has like put a stamp on that. Um, so sorry, I can't get much clearer than that.
Anyone else? Ebony, take us through the history of this memorialization in Alexandria. Did the start of this coincide with the end of the segregation era? The rise of the civil rights movement in the 1960s? Was there anything possible before then in
It
segregated?
started it started right after slavery. It's
Really?
even started before the war ended, as Blacks were coming to Alexandria to, find safety behind Union lines.
Yeah.
They were keeping the stories. And so because what I found is it was passed along, like, through the grapevine, if you will. And so that is like where I'm arguing it really, really began. As people came here and kept the memory of their time being enslaved, their ancestors' stories of enslavement, and the way they created community among one another with free Blacks that were already here in Alexandria. Um, they started to memorialize that story through simple things like naming patterns in family. Um, we all know that there's a father named after a son a lot, but I do a whole like family chart in, I think this is the first chapter, that shows how Black freed women in Alexandria carried on their mothers and mothers' story by naming their daughters and nieces and sisters after the women who came before them as their very first act of memory and memorializing that story and the heritage of their people. So in that individual and personal way, they're engaging in memory making there, but then they start creating the community and sharing stories and exchanging experiences with one another as they form community in Alexandria as free men and women. And right after slavery ends, well, with the cemeteries, they're already telling stories there. And then, where I need to, okay, I'm trying to stay on track, forgive me. Where I need to go back and do edits in my chapter on the Freedmen's Cemetery is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about burial practices and draw in diasporic elements there. I know there's some there. I want to spend some time there in that chapter, and then I really want to bring it home in the chapter on memory. So there's that. I just wanted to say that piece. But so they're telling stories in the cemetery, and then after the war is over, they are remembering these places because Alexandria was transformed by the war. Every building, jailhouse, house, uh, tavern, hotel, every personal residence, something was taken over by the army and used for another purpose. And so free people were working in those places, living outside, setting up tents and shanty towns and all of these places. And then when the war ended and life in Alexandria started to become what it became, these Black populations either continued to settle in those places that they had kind of set up shop, or they moved about, but they kept the stories as they moved about and started bringing people to those sites. So, like the Freedom House Museum, um, Rose Bailey is her name. Her father was enslaved in Texas, but he knew his mother was here in Alexandria. So after emancipation, he walked from Texas here to try to find his mother. And from there, he raised his daughter, Rose, who knew the story of her dad's enslavement and that he passed through what became the Freedom House. It was then just known as 1315 Duke Street. It had a number of different addresses, but it's now known as 1315 Duke Street. And she started just bringing group tours, like not a part of any like official organization. They eventually started the Society for Black Preservation in Alexandria, but she would just gather people who wanted to hear the story of slavery in Alexandria at the Freedom House and stand on the steps of this rundown, boarded up building telling that story. So it's a long way to answer your question. It began right during the war and right afterwards, and through the efforts of these Black women who had that memory in them and carried it through.
Great, thank you. All right, we have four people with their hands up. In order, we'll go first to Edna Medford, John Swallow, Dan Pritchett, and I think then Rachel Riley was the fourth in the row. So Edna, go ahead.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
I'm sorry, Edna. Dr. Jowers Barber has had her hand up for a minute, so I just don't want to. I hope that you respect that she's had her hand
All
up
right,
for a
well, I
minute.
don't see her. I don't see her. That's
That's okay.
Okay,
Yep,
we'll
I
get
see
to you,
it.
doctor. Don't worry. All right, Edna, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I have the most important question of the evening. Ms. Davis, did you ever take a course from me? Because I remember the name, but I don't remember that spelling. So
I did, yes.
you did.
I
Okay.
couldn't tell you which one it is now because I'm a little bit removed from undergrad, but yes, you and Dr. Clark Lewis, I took a few classes with.
Okay, great, great. Well, I apologize for anything I did wrong. But
No.
my question is, to what extent, if any, did the New York African Burial Ground Project inform your thinking on your dissertation?
Uh, it informed it greatly. I think long before I narrowed down how I was going to attack this,
Mhm.
I was in love with burial grounds because of the one in New York. It opened up my eyes specifically as a African diaspora student of that connection that was present in how there was a self-determination of this is how I bury my people in this foreign land with the traditions that I know, though they may be creolized or something, not as they initially were. This is what is in our memory to do with our dead and how we honor them and keep that those cultural that cultural continuity. Um, um, the book, Adrian Fron. I'm messing up the title, but the book there's a book on the African burial ground that also was
Mhm.
very useful in guiding um how I said I want to go back and tie in some of those more burial practices that are traditions from the Caribbean, from Africa, even from further south that I think I can see are present in some of the archival records that don't come up in any of the memorialization, like the public facing memorialization that I can see at the Freeman Cemetery today. It talks about um, that certain processions that maybe can speak to that, but there were certain artifacts, glass shards,
Mhm.
um, um, I want to call them seashell, oyster shells, um, bottle fragments
Mhm.
that I would loosely argue. Oh, and then rocks and what is it called? There was a Clovis point that they found that leads back to like
Yes.
indigenous time. But there were ways that I think there were ritual practice
Mhm.
that the archaeologists, I don't want to say they missed it, but it doesn't show up in the memorialization when you go now and you want to learn about it. It just says, oh, this is what we found. But it's like, what do you know what that means?
Oh,
So
wow.
I need to circle back and spend some time there. But the African burial ground um, long before I was a student and a doctoral student, that informed me that there is that cultural continuity in even in death practices that should be looked out for in all burial grounds.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, I have another question, one for Ms. Yaro, but I'll wait until everyone's had an opportunity to ask that.
Great, thank you. John Swallow.
Hi, I've got a question for each. Ms. Davis Hayes, we should talk later because maybe you're just a
Can't understand you. You're breaking up.
vacation, either this New Year's Eve or the following New Year's Eve could be part of Alexandria for.
Put it in the
John, you're
chat.
you can't understand you. You're breaking up.
Are there any statistics of how many fancy girls were bought? I'm sorry, what? Can you hear? Hello? Hi,
We
can you?
can't.
Okay.
You're
Oh,
you're.
now it's
you're
frozen. Hello.
Are you able to put it in the chat? The sound is a
Why don't you
little.
put your question in the chat for us? We'll move on to the next person. Your phone is breaking up.
Okay. Okay.
Right, Dan Pritchett.
Oh, sorry, Ed. Dan, can you hold on one second? Dr. Jowers Barber has had her hand up for a minute, so I
Oh,
do want to
okay.
give her time.
Go ahead, doctor.
Thank
Thank you
you
for
very,
joining.
thank you very much. Hello, Dr. Medford. I have to say that. And I did take classes from Dr. Medford. And to my
Uh-oh.
fellow HU history graduate students, HU.
You
For Miss Yaro,
No.
I'm interested. The fancy girl is really not an area or a part of the slavery history that I've been very familiar with. So I'm interested in this. I know the women were bought, so there was the ownership, but how possessive was it in terms of keeping them in that household? Were they shared? Were they given to other friends, colleagues? Were they used in that manner, or were they indeed just kept as the property of the person who bought them?
Hello. Uh, Usually the person who bought them assumed ownership of them, and they uh engaged with them as they saw fit. It was mainly about like what they desired. Um, I'm trying to speak carefully because it's a little like it's a little heavy and you don't want to be like insensitive in speaking about like the sexual abuse that they faced. But like for Karina, like she was his enslaved concubine, and so like she was like his partner in that way. And so like she had his children and like she stayed in enslavement until he died. But like oftentimes like, you could it didn't offer any type of security because they could be discarded still. There's a woman who I came across and she was sent to another state and with her children, and she didn't really have the resources, and it was dangerous because she was a Black woman and she didn't really have like contacts to help her. So she was quite dependent on him for his survival. But you would see sometimes that bachelors would often buy fancy girls, and when they married white women, the fancy girls might be discarded if like it made the situation with their wives uncomfortable. So it was kind of the situation for the woman that I just mentioned, where she was sent to another state and she was kind of struggling to maintain herself and her children because she was enslaved. Like she didn't really have that much at her disposal. So it kind of varied, but you would often see the person who purchased them is the one who claimed ownership of them.
Okay, I was just wondering if of course, it was a horrible situation, but if impounded upon the situation was that they were put into prostitution as well.
Yeah, so I know that they were either concubines or made to be enslaved prostitutes. More of what I looked at was them being concubines, enslaved
Okay.
concubines. So, but you can see in the record, like especially in the newspapers, sometimes you would see fancy girls if there was like a domestic violence situation or like something in the criminal section like that. Like you would see them in obscure places like that. um if you wanted to find them, oftentimes you would see like fancy girls being said to be prostitutes in the newspaper.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Right, Dan Pritchett was next.
Yes, I had a couple questions for Ebonee right now. Ebonee, you mentioned the Alexandria Gazette as one of your best sources. Was that an African American newspaper?
No, it was not.
Oh, but it's
It
a really, really good source anyway.
Oh, well, slave ads,
Mhm.
record accounts of uh I would say
Okay.
like mini insurrections. So it just was one of the newspapers of the day, but one of the more
Okay.
prominent ones. So it covered, and it was here before and after the war, and still is today.
Okay. And can I ask you one thing that fascinated me? Could you tell us, it's off topic, but could you tell us just a little about the reparations program? That sounds interesting.
Sure. So, at Virginia Theological Seminary in 2019 established a very tiny, tiny, tiny reparations fund. It's $2.8 million. And then in 2021, we started making payments to descendants of any Black laborer who was here between 1823, when the seminary was founded, and 1951, when it admitted its first Black student. So it covers slavery and after emancipation, with the acknowledgement that just because slavery ended doesn't mean life was grand or wages were fair, if wages were actually paid. And we began with 32 shareholders who are the people who are receiving the payment. We are now at 247. And the overall descendants active in the program are easily about 1,000. And so the way it works is if you are a descendant, there's a whole complicated process, but if you are a descendant of someone who labored here between those years, you are eligible to receive a payment once a year, every year, forever. We do a whole agreement onboarding thing. It's a very complex process, but we have been making annual payments for what will be 6 years starting next month when I do the payment run for the sixth time. And this Saturday, if anybody is free, we will be doing the groundbreaking for the memorial that will be built to the laborers of those descendants, honoring their labor. And it will have all of their names on it. We have 545 known laborers. 311 of them are named. The remaining are unnamed, but we know it was an enslaved girl in this professor's house at this year, and she was a charwoman, or whatever we know about her will go on the memorial until we find her name, and then we'll scratch it out and write her name. And so that is this Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. If anybody wants to come to Virginia Seminary, and we will have 4 of the elders in the program do the actual groundbreaking. I could go on forever talking about this though, so
that is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you.
It has been a delight, and the descendants in this program have informed my research because they specifically overlap with the Fort Ward community like greatly. And it's learning their stories, sitting down and doing oral histories for them for work that I became acquainted with real Black Alexandria. I had known the different things in museums, but I had not met the children of the people who are mentioned in these museums and the grandchildren, and learned about how they fought the city to keep their houses against eminent domain. This work has informed what I'm writing about, and I'm so nervous because I want to make them, the descendants, proud, in hopefully telling the story in a way that their ancestors would feel accurately captures what happened. But I could really go on forever. So
great, thank you.
Rachel Riley had your hand up.
First of all, I think we've all fallen in love with you both. Excellent work, and we're so excited for you to finish up. I wanted to talk about the Freedman Cemetery just a little bit. Back in the day when I was working and they were in the process of creating what you see today, I drove by there twice a day. It was part of my commute. And the gas station that was sitting on top of that plot of land was awful. And I realized what a sensitive project this must have been to remove the underground storage tanks of the gas station, and how sensitive it was on many levels to work with the city, archaeologists, the African American community, the technical obstacles, the environmental issues, the graves that extended out under South Washington Street, and deciding on the sculpture. I mean, it was just a huge undertaking. And yet now, because I live south of that, closer to Mount Vernon, but every time I go by, I'm so grateful for the people who put their time in to accomplish that. And it's such a memory of mine now to have seen that develop. And I'm so grateful to everyone who spends time there and has spent time there. So thank you for continuing the work. And I hope in your paper that you go into a little bit of the process that was yes, you're going to discuss that.
Yeah, each chapter site features the history of the site and then the process of memorialization, which, depending on the site, is a few years, but mostly is several decades. And it shows it through the lens of the community and the Black residents' fight to keep going until they saw a museum worthy and fit to tell the story and honor that memory.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of people were not happy when the right lane was shut down for a
Yeah.
long time to
Or
deal with
the
those.
way money is moved, like with,
Yep,
because this is the Woodrow Wilson Bridge that was in that. So you see
yep,
how money could have stopped that if they could have just paid these ladies off to pave over these graves and get this bridge done quick and
right.
easy. But then you learn like all the ways that there were concessions made on both sides so that this memorial could see the light of day. But it you kind of see the disturbance to the community, people's true feelings about such things. Again,
Right.
the Alexandria Gazette really is kind of like a tabloid at that time, and it's like, and then this
Yeah.
person said, and that person said.
Alexandria Gazette's been there all
Yes,
along. Yeah.
but it is. If I had more time, I think I would love to know from the practitioners what it was like to do that work. And I think that's for all burial grounds
Call
when
Catherine Weinrob. I put her in. I
you
put her
I
in the chat.
saw I'm going to, because that is just for me handling the records. It's like
Yeah.
my little heart can't take it because they're just these
Yeah.
graves are undone
Yeah.
and they
All
they
right. Well, thank
stumble upon
you.
them. So yeah.
I'll put my hand down if it's not gone already. Okay.
All right, Professor Medford had another question.
Hey, Edna.
Yes, yes. Hi, Rachel. Yeah, my question was for Ms. Yaro. Uh, as I recall, some of the passengers on the Pearl in 1847 were headed, they were taking what they would consider would be fancy girls to New Orleans. And the Edmondson sisters were two of those passengers. But I've never seen any documentation that indicated whether or not they were actually put into that, into prostitution. I know they finally made their way back home, but I don't know what happened to them in the meantime. Have you uncovered any information about them and the fancy girl trade?
Yes, so I do know the Emerson sisters, and they actually have a statue to commemorate them in Alexandria that
Mhm.
was put up some years ago. But they actually was saved from the trade because an outbreak actually happened in New Orleans. So there could be no incoming people. They were sent back, and then by that time they were able to basically get out of it thanks to thanks to the outbreak. Not wanting, I mean, you're not going to be able to get money if your enslaved people get sick and die. So they did have to come back, but I know that initially that they were being sent off because they tried to flee enslavement initially. So it ended up working out for them, trying to escape in the first place and then actually being sent and then being able to escape again from that phase. So fortunately they didn't end up being fancy girls, but they did end up being abolitionists to try to help others get out of slavery.
Mhm. I think one of them did die fairly soon after returning, if I'm remembering correctly. I have one last question for the two of you. How have the scholarships aided your greater understanding of the implications and the consequences of the Civil War?
Ebony?
Um, for me, it has, I think, driven home the fact that it was like a major turning point for the way Black communities, or I'll say in the Chesapeake region, formed their community. Because what I've found is that there were free and enslaved people living in community already, depending on how close you were to DC or to Baltimore, or there's like a nice little group of people in Montgomery County that are because they're the Quakers up there, and there's all these overlap of free and enslaved people creating community. But when the war came and people flocked to be behind Union lines, that the way that community looked completely shifted as these new people from even just further south in Virginia came and brought. And so you see something, again, diaspora hat on, you see something happening as culture is forming in this new place, akin to like when new Africans would arrive on the shores of South Carolina, bringing their culture and their traditions and merging it and like saying, this is how we cook our rice, or this is how we wear our hair kind of thing. It's the same thing. They're building their houses a little different, or um, there are these, oh, what is it called? It's like like a fake heating system with bricks that goes underground. I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's Crimean oven or something like that. I'm not saying it right, but there's all these innovative ways that are coming from other places that you see popping up, and it was the war that brought in these new people and these kind of creolized ways of being started to form. So at least for the records that I've come across, I'm seeing that this influx of people created community, changed the way the community looked and operated in the Chesapeake region.
So interesting. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Just I wondered how the scholarships that you've received were able to aid you in a greater understanding of the Civil War era.
I would say that the scholarships helped me do the research trip first off. That was a very big help. That was my first research trip as well. Um, but there were certain documents that were not digitized online. So being able to actually go to the archive and like go to the back room and look at the documents in person was really helpful for me in my understanding. Um, Touching them as well, like it was very scary, I'll be honest. Like I did not want to rip anything. Like it just was very dangerous, and the archivist was like kind of watching me like a hawk, like but I will say like with those records, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but we were still seeing like major purchases happening like towards the Civil War, like just kind of insight into like the day-to-day purchases. And of course, like when I went there, it was the records of a slaveholder. So just kind of seeing like what his account book and miscellaneous files were looking like, what his will was saying as well. And we got to see Karina and her children inheriting property, money after his death. We also got to see after the Civil War, actually her trying to receive the what was left to her in the will. It was a challenge because like they weren't technically married, like Virginia didn't like recognize that type of relationship. So she actually had to go to court and try to petition to get what was entitled to her. She didn't end up receiving it, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I was able to get insight into that.
When did he die?
He died 1864. 1864.
Okay, during the war. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
So kind of close to the Civil War.
Mhm.
All right, before we go to John O'Brien for his question, Ebonee, look at the chat. You have a booking for your talk. You're gonna we're your agent now. John Swallow wants you to call him for the first night at Alexandria. So there you go. Okay, John O'Brien, you had a question.
Thank you. This is for Fahtim'a. This idea of fancy girls being advertised explicitly, I'm more astounded than I ever have been about the whole slavery issue. The myth that the South would perpetrate to their northern friends was that the slaves were treated as family. that this is you'd as soon send a doctor for your sick slave as you would for a family member. And the religionists uh, repeated this nonsense, but to find that there is this whole class of humans for sale that were promoted as fancy girls, and as explicit as the ads were about that. I would think that the investigation of the whole religionists' view of this or ignoring this would be a topic in and of itself. Thanks for including it. Uh, is there any thought about have you found anything where the churches expressed any outrage when this would be advertised so publicly?
Yeah, so I had a couple more clippings that I wasn't able to include, but you would sometimes see like um discussions happening where they're trying to determine like is slavery okay, but okay, like maybe you can have slaves, but like participating in the fancy trade, like that's where we draw the line. Another article where you see like condemning the church members like outright and for their participation and how they should divest. So you kind of see it, I feel like you see it more in the newspaper articles, or at least I've seen them more in newspaper articles as opposed to like some other sources where you might have to like look at like personal papers or diaries. Newspapers, you can kind of see like across states, in mass, how people were feeling about it and the general consensus about it. And again, it was a small subset, so you won't see like millions and millions of articles, but you do see them more than you would think.
All right, anyone else? I just wanted to answer a more general question about, we've been so happy that we've been able to award you these small fellowships to help you in your research. I was wondering if given we hear a lot about the difficult state of history departments in universities across the country, and people are asking, why would anyone study this subject? To us and who are interested in history, it's pretty obvious why you would. But are you both glad that you pursued a PhD, spending all these years to get this doctor title, and how do you think it will help you in the future? Both of you.
So I am so happy that I'm pursuing my doctorate. I'm trying not to get like overwhelmed by everything else that's happening and like defunding and all that, just trying to just keep swimming. One foot in front of the other. I feel like I would feel very accomplished. It's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I know that I wanted to do. I knew initially, even before everything with this administration was happening, that like people don't always celebrate academics. So it's not like I was, coming into this with a sense of like, oh, everyone is going to, just have that type of energy around it. So I feel like me coming in knowing that this was something like I personally wanted to do and something that I wanted to work on, I still have that. It's just a little fear surrounding like the age of anti-intellectualism a little bit and like what that might mean for like the job market. But apart from the job market and the funds and all of that, like I am still happy that I pursued it. Ideally, I would like to do something for a job that I really enjoy and am interested in, and I feel like I found that with this program. So I don't have any regrets, and I honestly don't know what else I would want to do apart from history. So
Right, Ebonee?
I agree. I started my program in fall of 2020 when I applied, not knowing what 2020 would bring. So it's been just, roller coaster ride the whole way. But I am, I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm really am glad that I chose the African diaspora track. to really draw in those connections. It has just opened up like my eyes in just a completely different way. I studied abroad at Howard. I did a trip to Ghana when I was there in undergrad, and it made me. We went to the slave dungeons, and I was like, "This looks like Fort Washington Park. These forts are the same." And from then, I was like, I want to know why, and why Fort Monroe looks like this slave dungeon. Like, so going to Howard, studying African diaspora at Howard has changed everything for how I understand history, beyond the context of the United States and Black people's contribution beyond the United States, and slavery, but also have a greater appreciation of how Black people have created culture and identity and existed and like sustained themselves all this time in the United States. So I'm happy, craziness and all. I wouldn't change it. And I think being here in this area, I live in D.C., work in Alexandria, we have a front row seat to the way that what we all on this call hold true is trying to be stripped away and rewritten. And so it makes me feel like I have like a duty to do my part to not let that happen. So I'm staying the course.
Excuse me, I just wanted to say to you both, I've put my email address in the chat. I chair humanities and criminology at the University of the District of Columbia Community College. I am always looking for adjuncts, especially historians. So please email me and we will connect.
We shall. I have three sons, and one of them is a student at UDC.
All right. Okay.
Mhm.
Howard people are everywhere. You know, we are
Yes.
trained to go out and serve and teach, and this is what we do. So
Yes.
I have
Yes,
also just started
absolutely.
the historian, Dr. Medford. I'm going to take point of privilege here because many Howard people. Dr. Medford, please contact me. I've started the historian's lens, and that is my pushback against what's happening, a space for historians to talk about and connect the past with the present, looking at the future. I need you to be interviewed.
I would love to. Thank you. I definitely want to talk to you, and very soon. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So before we leave, everybody take a look at the chat because there's a lot of stuff going on here. People trying to hire people and emails and phone numbers, and this is become a whole networking thing. You know, so I think you should all pay the Lincoln Group a commission for this.
That's what we do.
All right. If nobody else has any other questions, this has been a wonderful program. We almost ran 2 hours. That's how
Good to see
interesting
you
it
all.
was. And I thank you all. See you soon.